Hi everyone, my name is Chad Holmes. I am here with a Cynerio rapid recap. Today we're going to give a little bit of a preview into a talk we're working on for November titled Dissecting the Healthcare Ransomware Landscape to kind of help everyone understand what the real risk to hospitals is and why so many ransomware attacks are happening in healthcare. Before we do that, I want to give a little bit of background into this talk. We were speaking with an analyst the other day. The analyst focuses on operations technology, has some healthcare experience, but not a ton. And the question they asked was a really good one, which was, when will healthcare providers face catastrophic ransomware attacks like Colonial Pipelines? And our immediate response was, well, they already are, right? Doesn't everyone realize that? And we quickly realized, no, they don't, because unless things are making newspapers and websites, they're probably not going to be visible. So we went back to the analyst a couple of weeks later and said, hey, here's the overwhelming detail that kind of paints the picture of the attacks that hospitals are facing, and had a great discussion and wanted to share some of the details that we shared with them that are becoming part of this bigger presentation, again, a month or so from now. So first, it's always helpful to understand where the question originated, and that was the Colonial Pipelines attack. So as a very quick recap, Colonial Pipelines fuels delivery for 45% of the East Coast. It was shut down back in May 2021, so about 5 or 6 months ago, for 6 days. And ended up paying the ransom, right? A lot of times ransoms aren't paid, but in this case, they said, hey, it's fiscally better if we actually pay it and get back online. So they paid a ransom of 75 Bitcoins. At the time, that was about $4.4 million. Now, interestingly enough, the Department of Justice intervened and was able to recoup 63.7 of those Bitcoins. But because of the fluctuation of Bitcoin, that was only about half of the original ransom paid, 2.3 million in that case. The other really interesting fact about the ransom component is the attackers didn't actually shut down the pipeline. They shut down the back office systems that allowed for things like billing. So Colonial decided to shut down the pipeline, which isn't all that well published and well known. So Colonial said, it's better for us not to ship oil and gas right now because we lose way more money than the $4.5 million. In response to this, Eastern European hacking collective called DarkSide made a statement. They didn't take credit for the attack, although it's well accepted that they did attack it, but they did say our goal is to make money. It's not to create problems for society. And that was kind of them saying, hey, what you're reading in the news isn't completely true. We're not completely the bad guys. In reality, they are completely the bad guys, but Colonial kind of tilted it a little bit more against them. So that helps frame kind of the original question we had is, when will healthcare see this? But the problem is healthcare is seeing significantly worse attacks in significantly higher numbers with significantly higher costs, both monetary and non-monetary. And by our estimates, it's actually a 20 times worse cost, 20 times worse in number of attacks. So if you look at this, we see the overall industry impact is $20.8 billion, and I'll have the references for this stuff at the end of the presentation. But the impact on the industry was almost $21 billion last year. There were at least 92 attacks. There were at least 600 facilities attacked in the healthcare space alone. We saw a report come out last week, which was absolutely tragic, at Spring Hill Medical. There was a ransomware attack there in 2019. Shut down almost all modern operations at the hospital. And what happened was caregivers, particularly nurses, were left doing things like charting with pen and paper and had no reliance on technology at all. In some cases, they were actually moving patients closer to the nurses' stations and just cranking up the volume on monitors to make sure that they could hear things because they couldn't monitor them remotely like they were used to. And it devolved into just complete chaos with compromised care all over the place. And it's a lawsuit there's a lawsuit playing out related to an unfortunate baby's death due to complications from the lack of care there at the time. So while that's one anecdotal incident, we're starting to see that not only is patient care being compromised in these situations, we're also seeing that facilities are shutting down, which has not only an impact on diversion, and we all know diversion of care leads to longer term issues, but we're starting to see real financial impact as well. Scripps Healthcare, for example, in Southern California, got a medium-sized system, has 5 or 6 hospitals and about a dozen or 2 dozen other facilities. They had an attack almost the exact same time as the Colonial Pipeline attack that has cost them over $100 million in lost revenue, in recovery costs. They have a $600 million lawsuit coming out against them, way more than the cost of the Colonial Pipeline attack. But because it's only published in a few select areas, people don't know about that. And we're seeing groups like Ryuk, a hacker collective that in the last 2 or 3 years has attacked over 200 facilities. They've collected over $100 million in ransom at an average ransom of $850K. So the reality is that when Colonial gets shut down, because there are gas lines that newspapers publish and websites publish, it gets a lot of attention, even though the impact is only a couple $1 million. When hospitals get shut down, there's not that dramatic impact until you see something like Spring Hill. So it's not as well known, but the actual real cost, both in human care and dollars and cents, is much, much larger. We estimate it at 20 times larger than anything like the Colonial attack. And so the obvious question is, how are attackers getting in? Up until recently, the attack vectors were kind of speculative and anecdotal. But in September 2021, just a few weeks ago, an outstanding study came out that focused on the impact of ransomware on healthcare during COVID-19. It was done by Ponemon Institute and sponsored by Sensinet. We don't have relationships with either group. Both are really well respected. I want to thank them for this report. It's an outstanding report. I highly recommend everyone read it. But what we found is that about 60% of ransomware attacks came through traditional entry points, cloud applications, phishing, on-prem applications. Those areas where defenses are known, the strengths and weaknesses are known, we're doing everything we can to protect them. And we'll continue to work with traditional vendors to do that. But what the report also said is that medical devices and IoT devices make up for over 20% of those attacks. 1 in 5 attacks came from devices that really don't have a lot of security protections in place. Traditional approaches don't extend to them. People aren't even really sure how to properly lock them down. They just kind of assume they're protected. In reality, there's a whole world of IoT and medical devices that are just out there introducing entryways for attackers. And when we saw this report, we were like, yes, we've been telling everyone this. We know that's the case. So that's right in our sweet spot. Cynerio is always here to help secure those, of course. And so the question then becomes, when are we going to see immediate catastrophe? And we have in a couple cases. The Alabama Spring Hill case is tragic. There was also a case in Germany where diverted care may or may not have impacted the care on a patient who eventually died. There's mixed reports there. But from our standpoint, we're hoping we don't actually see significant catastrophe. Because if you go back to that hacker quote from the Colonial attack, they're focused on revenue, not chaos. Better put, they're focused on just enough chaos to drive revenue, but not enough to actually get media attention. And the reason being is if they're stealing money and impacting hospitals through diverted care, they're just going to get investigations and money recouped, right? They're just going to have their ransom taken back from them in whatever means needed by the FBI and Justice Department. But if they start impacting patient care to a point where there's significant body bags, to kind of put it crassly, the US government will get involved. The US government loves to put pressure on different countries to shut down these collectives if it gets too bad. So hackers have actually identified this legal sweet spot where they can exist in a relatively low risk world, meaning they just lose some of their ransom, but for the most part, they get more and more ransom being paid. And they avoid the high risk of government involvement unless dead bodies start piling up. Again, I apologize for being crass, but it's kind of the reality of how this is being covered. So from our point, unless there's a shift to intentionally harming patients, and of course that would have global ramifications that would lead to invasions effectively if it was done at a wide scale, we don't think direct attacks on patients is likely, right? They may happen here and there, often because the attackers just accidentally do them. But the reality is we don't think they're going to start attacking patients. We think they're going to keep shutting down facilities to a point where they have to pay ransoms because they have to, 1, treat patients, and 2, collect revenue to keep those doors open. So of course, we can help. We're here to help from day one with our incident response tools, as well as throughout the rest of your hospital's history. We work with rapid risk identification related to IoT and medical devices. We rapidly segment those devices and test the segmentations to make sure that they don't impact patient care. We harden services to make sure that if data is coming in and out, it's only the data that's supposed to be going where it needs to be. And then finally, we put vendor access controls in place to make sure if your vendors are hacked, that doesn't become your hack, right? You don't want your vendors to be attacked and then pass that to you through the secure connections that they have. This was the 30-second overview. We're happy to give deeper demo and deeper information about what we do and how we do it, but we can roll this out really quickly. We've also, as of today, we launched a small hospital offering. So if you are a small hospital, you're short on staff, you're not really sure where to turn to, but you know you're at risk of ransomware attacks, particularly through connected devices, let us know. We have packages specifically for you that have gotten a lot of really good feedback just in the few hours that we've had them out there. What else you can do other than contacting Cynerio today? You can take action. First is chat with your team. Ask your IT and network and security and biomed teams how they're addressing IoT security specifically. It may be that they're just not doing anything. That's not unusual. In all likelihood, they're probably thinking about it, but not quite sure where to start. Enable them, tell them, reach out to Cynerio, reach out to others in our space, preferably us, and we're glad to help. Also, ask them about their gaps between IT and IoT best practices. A lot of folks assume that IT best practices extend to IoT, and it's just really not the case. They're two different sets of technology that need two different approaches to protecting them. Also, sit back and think about what you're going to do in the event of a breach, right? What amount of downtime and recovery can you reasonably handle? We've seen that costs like scripts are in the hundreds of millions. We've seen 50 million is a pretty common number for places like University of Vermont. Cybersecurity insurance isn't covering a lot of the costs. Again, going back to that scripts attack, it covered $6 million of the 100+ million. So understand what your cybersecurity insurance covers. In the event of a ransomware attack, who are you going to call? Like literally, who are you going to pick up the phone immediately and say, hey, we need help? What are those first 3 or 4 calls? Role play that a little bit, and then think about what the immediate actions are going to be taken. In some cases, the actions are literally running around unplugging devices so that they don't get impacted, particularly if you haven't taken proactive steps. So start thinking all this through and think about how you can protect yourselves. So with that in mind, feel free to reach out if you need any help. My name is Chad Holmes, chad.holmes@cynerio.com. You can sign up for upcoming talks. Again, this is a preview of a much, much larger talk that we're giving in mid-November. So if you want to register for that, go to our Contact Us page, drop your contact info in there, reference this, and we'll make sure that you get the invite. I've put a lot of different references here that we've used throughout the presentation. If I've missed any, let me know, and I'm happy to update them. And of course, if you want the slide deck, just reach out, and I'm happy to send it along too. With that, I thank you. Look forward to hearing from you soon, and good luck against all these ransomware attackers.